Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabardi. Today is Wednesday, March 13th, and we are continuing on with our free agency talk. Yesterday was day 2 of free agency, so we will be going over some of the biggest moves from there. We will additionally be touching on the Carolina Panthers, who have definitely been a punching bag for a lot of media outlets over the course of the past couple seasons. I have some different thoughts on the Panthers, where I do understand the things that have gone wrong for them, but we also have to understand where they are currently at as a franchise, so we'll be getting into all of that. Then in the second half of the show, we will be talking some basketball, from bubble teams for March Madness as tournament play continues on, to some of the action from last night in the NBA. Before we get into the show, though, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you may be keeping up with us, and for any of our live viewers to use the chat, give us your thoughts on the conversation, and we can make the show as interactive as possible. If you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker throughout the show. That is gsmcpodcast.net. My bad there. On that note, we will be getting into our first segment of the day, talking about NFL free agency. We gave some winners and losers yesterday. Probably won't get quite as gimmicky with it today, but we will be talking about some of the biggest moves that took place, starting with the Baltimore Ravens, who signed running back Derrick Henry in what I think is one of the best moves of free agency up to this point. Henry was signed to a 2-year deal worth $16 million and given $9 million guaranteed. He is obviously not quite the same level of dominance that he was for a lot of those years in Tennessee, but I do still think that he has a lot left in the tank. I think that this is a great price, especially considering DeAndre Swift got similar money from the Bears. I think that the Ravens making this type of move is a game changer of some sorts, because he is absolutely the best running back that has been there in Baltimore for a handful of years now. And again, no, he is not the offensive player of the year caliber that he was a handful of years ago, but he has been able to stay very healthy considering the workload that he's been given over the course of the past few years. And his production, while it's not quite the same, it still has not dropped off in a drastic way. Excuse me. But he has led the league in rush attempts in 4 of the last 5 seasons. He did play just 8 games in 2021 when he was dealing with a foot injury, but even in that season, 8 games, 937 yards, and 10 touchdowns still. So he was just 63 yards of 1,000 despite playing in only 8 games. If you take out that injured season, he has rushed for 1,000 yards in every season going back to 2018-19. He has also scored at least 10 touchdowns, even including that injured season in 2018-19 as well. So you get the point. He is very good. This Ravens offense was dominant in the run game last season, significantly better than any other offense in the league in terms of running the football. Now you add the bruiser that is Derrick Henry, and I do think that this makes them so much scarier. I think that it makes Lamar Jackson potentially more dangerous. We saw the way that in Tennessee, Ryan Tannehill was able to actually elevate his play due to the fact that he had Derrick Henry in the backfield. he was able to utilize an offense that was very much predicated on play action passes. And now with the running threat between Derrick Henry, but also with Lamar Jackson keeping the ball himself, it's going to be freezing opposing defenses, having them crowd the front box more and more, and it should open up more along the back ends for Lamar Jackson and this passing game. Now, they have not yet added a receiver to the core yet. Zay Flowers, of course, had a great rookie season for them. They are going to need more. Nelson Aguilar became a free agent for them. They had Odell Beckham Jr. as well as a free agent. Devin Duvernay, who played more so special teams, but had stints with Baltimore where he was a little more of a focus in the passing game. But they still do have some gaps at receiver. Not anything I don't think that they can fix during the draft as well, but it would be nice to see them go out and get another receiver as well. Because when it comes down to whether or not you believe the Ravens are a true contender, it is pretty much predicated on that passing game, where we've always known that Lamar Jackson can scramble, run the ball himself. It's a matter of, can he take the steps he needs to be a passer to compete in the playoffs? And I did think that if you look at the regular season, I know that it's hard, we get caught up in recency bias and everything, but this was far and away Lamar's best season from a pure passing standpoint. If you just look at some of the difficulty of throws that he was able to make, I thought that this was going to be the year where he really proved the doubters wrong, and unfortunately that was not really the case. He threw for a career high yards this season, career high completion percentage, so he made some strides in terms of passing, but can he do it in the playoffs? The defense has been able to hold themselves together pretty well. Now they lose Geno Stone to the Bengals. They lose Patrick Queen, who signed with the Steelers yesterday. So those are losses, but they were able to come to terms with a long-term contract with defensive tackle Justin Madubuike. They have him, Roquan Smith, and Kyle Hamilton in the three levels of the defense. And I think that they should be back again. So I do really like this Derrick Henry move. There's still more that they should be looking to do. They did also lose their starting guard as well. It was Morgan Moses. He went to the New York Jets, so a pretty nice addition there for the Jets, I might add. But the Ravens still should be in good positioning to contend again next season. So wanted to point all of that out. I also wanted to touch on the Houston Texans, who I did not have as one of my winners initially in free agency when I did the show yesterday. But I do definitely think they are in that light where at first they lose a couple of their young defenders, Jonathan Grenard and Blake Cashman, both go to Minnesota. But now they've done a really good job of adding additional talent, that now they basically swapped players when yesterday they signed Danielle Hunter, the edge rusher from Minnesota, who is coming off of a career-high 16.5 sacks. So they give him the big bucks, $48 million guaranteed out of the 49 total. So that was definitely a draw for Hunter coming into this. But they were also able to add some really nice talent as well. If we want to stick with the defensive side of the ball, they added Azeez Al-Shaair, who I think has been a very underappreciated linebacker over the course of the past few seasons. I know that last year, of course, we had the matchup of Dre Greenlaw and Fred Warner in San Francisco, but Al-Shaair was right on that same caliber of player, and the past couple seasons now, he has been in Tennessee and holding it down, I think, a fair amount, but just not really on a competitive team in Tennessee, but he finished probably also due to the fact that he was no longer with Fred Warner. He finished with a career high in tackles, and I do think that for Al-Shaair here, he can sort of rehone this energy where you look at him last year, it was a nice little reset for him where he was finally fully healthy, started all 17 games. The first time he started every game in his career, he was able to prove himself as a valuable player without the likes of a Fred Warner. He had the 5th most tackles in the NFL as a whole last year. He goes to Houston along with his running mate in Tennessee as well from last year in Danico Autry, who is another player. He's more so getting up there in age. He's going to be entering his age 34 season. But Autry also just came off of a career-high sack season where he had 11.5. And he is a big-time impact player on that front end that has a lot of talent. They already had the reigning defensive rookie of the year in Will Anderson Jr. They lose Grenard, which hurts at first, but they bring in Autry and Hunter, and they sort of revamp themselves in a different way. And I think that they will be a very effective defense, again, playing under D'Amico Ryans, who has really helped to, and credit to the front office as a whole, where they have been able to really turn this around. Nick Caserio running the show there as the general manager. This is a Texans franchise that for a long time was sort of sputtering, where if you go back, of course, a lot of complicated things took place with Deshaun Watson, but at first he was requesting a trade out of Houston even before all of the allegations came out, because the franchise was not willing to communicate with him in terms of coaching or anything along those lines. He was fed up with them and he wanted out in Houston regardless. And before that, they were paying these massive contracts to the likes of Brock Osweiler. They were unable to get their quarterback situation figured out for a handful of years. Matt Schaub, who had a fine career ultimately, but that was, the big time guy there in Houston for the longest time. And no disrespect to Matt Schaub, but definitely not a franchise level guy. The fact that Bill O'Brien was ever the general manager in the first place is just a crazy move to me. Gave him as much power as they did, but they have really been able to turn this thing around, including a move that I haven't even made yet, which was the fact that they were able to trade for Joe Mixon. The Texans were a team that I thought should be active in the running back market for as much money as they had, and having a young quarterback in Stroud, adding a legitimate running back to that offense should help him develop. Dameon Pierce just sort of fell off a cliff last year. I'm not really sure even how. Devin Singletary was fine. He was good down the stretch of the year, but Joe Mixon is definitely much more of an upgrade and should help this offense really piece itself together even more so. Ideally, you get Tank Dell back from injury, and CJ Stroud is able to continue developing into his sophomore season. Now, last couple notes here I wanted to touch on is the Philadelphia Eagles. I did not have them as a winner on day one of free agency. Now, they definitely won the headlines by signing Saquon Barkley to the deal that they did, over $12 million per season, which is a little bit steep, especially for an Eagles franchise that historically has been able to get production out of the position without having to necessarily spend the big bucks on it. So again, it felt like they did a good job, winning over the media, but I still had big time concerns with the defense. Now, they did some moves over the past 24 hours to help address that as well. Yesterday we touched on the Bryce Huff addition, who could be an impact player for them. But yesterday they also brought back CJ Gardner-Johnson. Gardner-Johnson was with the Eagles during their Super Bowl run a couple seasons ago. He signed in Detroit last season. He had his ups and downs during the year, so I don't think he's necessarily a tremendous player, but he is an upgrade from what the Eagles have going on. They were really walking the line of both ends of the spectrum in terms of their secondary last year, where they had a lot of unproven youth and they had a lot of age as well. So I think that this is a nice move to bring back CJ and try and get that second line a little bit more complete. And they also yesterday, or a couple days ago, brought back Brandon Graham. So they addressed the defense by some means. I still wouldn't consider them outright winners, and we have tons of free agency left, of course, so no team is winning the Super Bowl just based off of their free agency moves. I think that the Eagles should definitely be looking to continue to add on the defensive side of the ball as the offseason continues. But they did make some moves in the right direction to address the defense over the past couple days, so I did want to give them credit for that, even more so than for the Saquon Barkley deal, which has the most amount of people excited. But that is all we have time for on this subject. We are going to be taking a break, and when we come back on the other side, I want to talk about the Carolina Panthers, who have also been a big name in the national media and for a lot more negative reasons. So I want to address all of that. That is what we will be getting to when we come back on the other side of the break, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just talked about some of the biggest moves from day 2 of free agency. We are going to be getting now into the Carolina Panthers and their situation as a whole. I will note very briefly that the Chargers have just released wide receiver Mike Williams. That just broke. I guess brief 10-second thoughts here is it's not overly surprising. Williams has dealt with a lot of injuries. We know that the talent is there, but the Chargers are in a horrendous salary cap situation. They would like to bring him back, but he will be hitting the open market. So I just wanted to address that as it currently breaks. But talking about the Panthers here, they have been given a lot of grief over the course of the past couple days. Really, it's extended to the regular season where David Tepper, he was throwing drinks on fans during the games. The reputation coming out of the building was that he was overly hands-on and was a little bit of a distraction for the locker room at times and for the coaching staff in terms of allowing them to run the type of team that they were hoping to. Tepper recently bought the Panthers, has been a very successful businessman, but sort of seemed to take the lesson that dealing with businesses outside of the NFL versus inside the NFL is definitely a different monster when it comes to actually how to build a team. And supposedly he's supposed to be taking a step back now, which should be a step in the right direction for the Panthers, but it has not come without some bodies along the way. Some dead bodies, you could call it, specifically with the mismanagement of the Brian Burns situation. I won't get too in depth with it again because we talked about it yesterday. We've talked about it for the past couple weeks, the way that this is all played out. But a massive mismanagement with Brian Burns and his contract. Now, you've all heard the rumors that have come out that it is pretty legitimate, or thought out to be, that the Panthers were offered multiple first-round picks and a second-round pick from the LA Rams during the 2022 NFL season, and they chose to turn it down. They got another year and a half out of Burns. In 2023, Burns took a little bit of a step back. Ultimately, still a fine player, and he's still very young, so I don't think it should be any major signs for concern for the Giants who have now acquired him. But they then franchise tagged him, refused to have any sort of contract negotiations, and trade him for just a second-round pick and a fifth-round pick. Or was it a sixth-round pick? Along those lines, though, second-round pick, day 3 pick, not enough for the talent that is Brian Burns. And they sold low on him in general because there was never going to be less of a value than currently. He was coming off of a down season. He didn't have a long-term contract already set in place, and they decided to move off from him, which I think is a mistake because the Panthers currently are a bad team, as we know. They won just one game last year, and they should be having the number 1 overall pick this upcoming season, except for the fact that they traded it last season in order to move up to the number 1 spot and select Bryce Young. So this obviously has been a very rough stretch for the Panthers from a general manager standpoint. They've made a trade, they cleaned house, and now they have a new slate with a new head coach in Dave Canales that they are hoping to turn this situation around. But as it currently stands, with the amount of talent that is on the roster, you don't have all too many players that you really need to go out and pay the big money to, because of the fact that you're very undermanned in terms of talent. So they instead have all this extra money that they can potentially go out and spend, and they should have, in my opinion, used that on Brian Burns, bring him back for another year, and try and at least sell him off at the deadline this year to a contending team that needs an edge rusher, or next offseason. Unless you think he's going to fall off a cliff this year, this was going to be the lowest you could possibly trade him for, and they did it. I suppose they just wanted a fresh start, but I think that that is poor management. Now, they did have all of this extra money. They go out and they sign a couple of offensive guards that also has a lot of people talking. They bring in Robert Hunt from the Dolphins, a 5-year deal worth $100 million, and Damian Lewis from the Seahawks, a 4-year deal worth $53 million. These should, in theory, be upgrades to the situation that they had last year, but neither of these players are all-pro talents, Pro Bowl talents, at least haven't shown to be just yet. They're both starters, which is a start for them because they are very much undermanned across really the offense as a whole. But the offensive line was a big issue, especially considering you have this small quarterback in Bryce Young that you've invested so much into in terms of the compensation for the trade rights to him, and you haven't really put any talent around him yet or protected him up front. So that's what they did. They have all of this money. I do understand that these contracts that they gave out to the guards were very expensive and could be seen as bad deals. I do also just want to point out that the way that this is all unfolded for them, and this is going to be a comment that is defending them, but it's like they've been so poorly managed over the course of the past couple seasons. They almost had to overpay in order to get players to come to their organization because they've put out nothing from a front office and from a product on the field as being worth investing into. So as a result, they have to go out and pay Hunt and Lewis these big time deals for more than most people were probably expecting them to go make. But I also don't disagree with the moves because it's not like they're spending this money in the near future on any other real game-changing players. You look at their roster as a whole, and it's kind of hard to find people that other teams are going to have to specifically game plan for, which is kind of a crazy statement, but I also don't know really where the argument is. By the way, I said the Panthers had one win. They have 2 wins, so my apologies for being too discrediting of them. But there's just not all that much talent on either side of the ball, and they're hoping to take some steps in the right direction this upcoming season, which is why they go and they invest into the offensive line. Just yesterday, they traded for Deontay Johnson in a deal that included, it was a late pick and it was one of their cornerbacks as well. Was it Dante Jackson possibly? I'm trying to remember off of the top of my head. It was Dante Jackson. Dante Jackson is a fine player, so it's a little bit of a loss for their defense here, and their defense actually did perform better than many probably expected, but they lose Jeremy Chin, they lose Brian Burns, they now lose Dante Jackson. But the priority for the Panthers this season is going to be trying to elevate the play of Bryce Young and making sure that their investment wasn't all for nothing. And they understand that they are far from contention. That's why they go out, they sign a young head coach in Dave Canales. They give him a longer term deal, almost acknowledging, we know that we are not championship competitive for a few years. We're trying to build this thing up. And I do like the idea of bringing Canales in. I think if Bryce Young is ever going to pan out, Canales should help bring it out of them. They go and they get, a lot of people are very split on Deontay Johnson. He's a very good player. He was a little bit disappointing after having some years where there was obviously the touchdown drought for as long as there was, and he went the entire 2022 season without a touchdown after going for over 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns in 2021 that saw him be selected to the Pro Bowl. So disappointing. Last year, he dropped even more in terms of passing yards. Receiving yards, I should say. Now, he was dealing with some injuries during the year. The quarterback play and the offense as a whole was not very productive last season in Pittsburgh as well, but he at least caught 5 touchdowns, and I do think that this is at least putting together a bit more of an offense that can help Bryce Young out here. For me, I've never been the highest on Bryce Young, and I feel like there are a lot of excuses being made for Bryce Young. Probably it is fair to some degree, because you look at that Panthers organization and the way they have run the past couple years. It's not a good situation for a young quarterback. I also think that it's so much excuse making that now we can start to see the Panthers putting things together. They're still a ways away. You're hoping that Jonathan Mingo, the second round receiver that they drafted, it was last season, that he can sort of turn himself around. He really struggled in my eyes in that first season, but there also wasn't loads of talent around him as well to help elevate the receiver room. So the Panthers have a long way to go. Bryce Young has a long way to go personally, but this is just kind of where the Panthers are at. They're going to have to overspend on free agents as they build this up. Free agency can be almost a little more harmful than people realize at times when it comes to making a panic move, going out and just throwing money at a player to try and fix a hole. Lucky for the Panthers, they have so many holes that they're not going to be competitive, and they can afford to take on some of these less than ideal contracts. I say lucky a little bit in an ironic way, but they are able to accept that they know they are probably overspending, but it is for the sake of they have to build themselves up during this period before they can start acting like a Class A franchise, because that's just not what they are right now. They have to prove themselves, basically everybody in that building, and I've been very high on the praise of Dave Canales, head coach, as well, but he is somebody who very quickly moved up the ranks during the NFL. We've seen times in recent history, if you look at Brandon Staley, the way that it can be a mishire, but I believe in Canales. I think that a lot of players on this roster have a lot to prove, and I think they are going to take a step forward. Again, after winning just 2 games this past season, it's almost impossible to take a step backwards, but that is where they are currently at. And now we are going to be taking our second break of the show. When we come back on the other end, we're going to be getting into some college basketball, talking about some of the biggest bubble teams that are playing in conference tournaments throughout the week. So stick with us and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just finished up talking some NFL for the day. If we have any other sort of big-time breaking news in the NFL, we will maybe touch on that. But as for now, we are going to be talking college basketball, where we are on bubble watch. We're in the final week of the season before March Madness. Selection Sunday is this Sunday, and a lot of people have their eyes glued to these conference tournament games. So that's what we're specifically going to be focusing on. I know that maybe a nationwide favorite is the likes of an Indiana State, but they are already out of their tournament. They're sitting back waiting to see what these other teams do. So I want to specifically focus on the teams that are playing, have a chance to put themselves in the dance. So on that note, we are going to start in the ACC with Wake Forest. This is a team, of course, made national headlines, maybe not for their basketball play themselves, but because of the court storming incident when they beat Duke, which takes me into the idea that they have had some quality wins this year that put themselves in position to potentially make the tournament this year. Now, the issue is after that big time incident, they really fell off down the stretch of the season. They lost 5 of their last 8 games. They did at least pick up a big time win last weekend against Clemson to end off the regular season. That was their second quadrant 1 win of the season. They were just 2-5 in quad 1 this season though, and they had just 2 wins in the top 2 quadrants on the road. Road wins can be a big factor in terms of figuring out what teams should be making the tournament. Wins away from home specifically is sort of the ideology behind that, and Wake Forest was not really able to do so this season. You can point to a couple of the big wins, such as the Duke win, as to why they could be dangerous and could make the tournament, but I do think they're going to have to still establish themselves more in this ACC tournament. They are facing off against Notre Dame today. That won't really be necessarily the deciding factor for them, which means it's those next 2 games, if they even make it 2 games past, that would be the big time decision makers for them. If they beat Notre Dame today, they advance to play Pitt, another team that is on the bubble. We'll get to them in a moment. And then they could really lock themselves in by potentially knocking off North Carolina. I know that is still a ways away here. They still have to establish themselves, but that's really the path that Wake Forest is looking at to fully establish themselves as a tournament team. I would say they would have to knock off Pittsburgh, but we will also see the way that everything else plays out here. So on the note of Pitt, they have a chance, of course, to prevent Wake Forest from making the tournament. I think it would be very hard for the Demon Deacons to make their way into the tournament with a loss to Pittsburgh. Pitt is currently 44th in the net ranking, hovering around the bubble. They have a few really solid wins as a part of a 20-plus win season that they've currently put together, 21 wins as a whole. Now, they, unlike Wake Forest, have 5 wins on the road within quads 1 and 2, which includes big-time wins against Duke and Virginia. So a couple conference wins there on the road should help them as well. I personally would be interested in seeing Pitt in the dance. There is a freshman guard that they have, Carlton Carrington, that a lot of NBA scouts are interested in for this year's draft. I feel like, just as me personally, I'm a big-time NBA guy, so I like to see as many prospects as possible in these big electric moments. Carrington seems like he has the ceiling of somebody who, despite dealing with some inefficiency this year, could pop off for some big moments. So, like I sort of outlined, they have a similar path here with Wake Forest. They can probably gatekeep Wake Forest from making the tournament, better solidify themselves with a win. Again, this is also assuming that Wake Forest is able to take down Notre Dame. Should happen. Notre Dame has not been a good team this year, but Pittsburgh would secure their spot if they were able to advance and knock off North Carolina. It's cutting it a little bit close if they are unable to take down the Tar Heels, but they do still have a chance to make it as long as they don't lose to that winner of the Wake Forest Notre Dame matchup. Finishing up some thoughts here on the ACC, we also have Virginia, who is right around the bubble. They are currently projected to be in the tournament, and I know that they are not necessarily a favorite team of the nation, in large part due to the fact that their offense is pretty lackluster. They play smothering defense. That's been the real, defining identity of Virginia basketball for years. Interestingly enough, we just talked about Carrington for Pitt. They have Ryan Dunn. He's a guard, sort of. He's a forward, sort of. I'm curious what he would officially be listed at when he comes into the NBA. But someone with an incredible ceiling, in my opinion, specifically on the defensive end. If he's able to refine himself some on offense, I think he could be a little bit similar to maybe an Isaac Okoro of the Cleveland Cavaliers. Again, I don't think he's going to go anywhere near as high as Okoro did, and Okoro was, despite having a very nice season, a little bit overdrafted in his respects. I believe he went 4th overall. So for Virginia, could be an interesting team, interesting in a little bit of a weird way. They were a high seed and were upset by Furman last year, so I think that also sours some people in terms of their views of Virginia. But in all reality, they probably just have to avoid being upset in their first ACC tournament game to make the dance this year. I will say their resume isn't incredibly impressive. They're 2-6 in quad 1, 6-3 in quad 2, so 8-9 total. They have a losing record. They haven't had a super difficult strength of schedule. All things considered, just having 17 games in the top 2 quadrants, we have a lot more teams that were more so battle-tested than that. They also were blown out a couple times in this past month. They had a 34-point loss to Virginia Tech and a 25-point loss to Duke. They're 3-4 in their last 7 games. And now we are coming into an era of the decision making here where how teams are playing at the end of the season does not weigh heavier than the season as a whole. I feel like I disagree with that a little bit. We want to see the best teams in the tournament as a whole, but I can also somewhat understand the reasoning there. Ultimately, it is the experts and the committee that are making the decisions. So as of now, they are projected to make the cut as a low seed. We'll see how that all plays out. Next team we have here is St. John's, of course coached by Rick Pitino, so he is a big-time storyline here, would potentially be able to sort of turn around the St. John's program that has been struggling over the course of the past couple seasons. And this has not been the perfect season for St. John's, where they started 12-4 and then lost 8 of their next 10 games. After that 8th loss in the stretch, it was against Seton Hall. He went on the notorious rant where he just took it to his players about their lack of coachability. They weren't good enough, they weren't athletic enough, and the team then after that responded with a win in Georgetown on the road. He apologized, and they've since won 5 straight games, including a quadrant 1 win against Butler on the road. So again, been a very eventful, little strange of a season for St. John's, but they have a real chance here. As it currently stands, they are in that last team in range where they might have to do a play-in game to make the tournament as a whole. They have a chance to turn their tournament odds around with a redemption game against Seton Hall tomorrow. So could be a little bit fun to see there, but afterwards it would become increasingly difficult. I believe they would have to face off against UConn if they advance from there. So still not a great path for St. John's, but it is in the realm of possibility for sure. Also in the Big East, we have Villanova, currently 17-14. And interesting to note, the record for the most losses by any program to make the NCAA tournament with an at-large bid is 15. So Villanova would have to go all the way in the Big East tournament in order to avoid reaching that number 15 themselves. Now, does this mean that they have to? No, not necessarily. they have been very battle tested this season, and they could be in the argument of it's not about your worst losses, but it's about how well you can play the best teams. And they have been very battle tested this year. 14 games in quadrant 1 alone. They were 4-10, so not great necessarily, but they were able to beat UNC in neutral territory. They beat Creighton on the road, so some big time wins there. They are 5-1 in quadrant 2, so some argument there for sure. The issue is they really hurt themselves early in the year with some bad losses in the first 10 games of the season, where they lost to Penn, St. Joseph's, and Drexel. Again, all in December. I think the latest of the group was in early December, so really hurt themselves there. In terms of, again, you look at sort of that cutoff line in terms of the most losses ever to receive an at-large bid. That is an obstacle for them. But it's been a very up and down season for them. They lost 5 straight in January as well to much better opponents, but that absolutely hurts them as well. And they are currently on a 2-game losing streak with losses to Seton Hall and one of the craziest games of the year against Creighton on Saturday. So I personally think that they will be out when Selection Sunday arrives, but if they want a shot, it's going to have to start in this tournament. They are first matching up against DePaul, which in theory should be a win. DePaul has been miserable this season. They would then face Marquette, obviously a much more difficult situation. I'm not sure what the update is on terms of Kolek's injury status, but they would then have to likely play Creighton to make the final, which is kind of the territory I feel like they would have to reach in order to make the tournament this year, so they definitely have their work cut out for them. Last couple teams here, we are going to shift to the Pac-12, talking about the Colorado Buffaloes. I know you heard plenty about Colorado during college football season, but this is a team you can definitely get real excited for. I at least personally am. They dealt with a lot of injuries throughout the course of the season, and as a result, they were really subpar in conference play in January and early February, but they're currently on a 6-game win streak. They picked up their second quad 1 win of the season, beating Oregon on the road last week. I'm personally rooting for them to make the tournament. I am fascinated in Cody Williams, the forward for Colorado, notably the brother of Jalen Williams, J-Dub, on the Oklahoma City Thunder. Could be a potential top 5 draft pick. So again, I'm an NBA guy. I would like to see him play some of these big-time meaningful games. They are currently the 3 seed in the Pac-12 tournament. Going to have a key matchup when they next play, as they face off against the winner of the Utah-Arizona State game. Utah is also one of these teams on the bubble, so this could be a potential statement game for either of these programs. On the note of Utah, it's going to be difficult for them, especially because their leading scorer this season, big man Braden Carlson, left their game versus Oregon with an elbow injury last weekend. As of now, when this show was starting, I don't think that we have an injury update on whether or not he'll be cleared to play tonight, where they will be facing off against Arizona State at 11:30 Eastern time at least. So there is a lot of time, obviously, for things to develop here. I would probably guess that he is going to play, but again, I just don't know if we have that information at this current moment. If they have any hope of getting into the tournament, it's going to start with at least this win against Arizona State, and then we'll see if they are able to compete with Colorado, if that could potentially seal their bid as well. But A lot of interesting storylines here as conference championship week is underway. So that is all we have on that for now. We will be sure to keep you updated with all the newest updates as the week goes on. But for now, that is all we have time for. So we are going to be taking our final break. And when we come back on the other side, we will be getting into the NBA action from last night. So stick with us and we will be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. We are headed into our final segment of the day. We are going to be talking some NBA from last night. So we'll be covering a variety of different games that took place. We will start off, it wasn't all too much of a game, but we did have the Philadelphia 76ers face off against the New York Knicks on primetime TV. And this was OG Anunoby's first game back. He had missed the past month or so with an injury, so he returns. And I don't want to say that this matchup against the 76ers is necessarily the biggest test in the world in terms of the defense. We know how much better the Knicks have been defensively this season when they have had OG Anunoby on the court. Some of the on-off numbers with him have been ridiculous, but again, there has also been a lack of real sample size with that. So something that we're going to continue to monitor. The 76ers have been really struggling as of late, and it's sort of hard to take a win against. And granted, they were smothering the 76ers all game. They only allowed 79 points. This is just coming off of this past weekend where neither team reached 80 in the 76ers actually won with 79 points, while the Knicks only put up 73. But this is the Sixers' third straight game not being able to reach 100 points. So again, I wouldn't say that this is the best measuring stick in the world, but for Anunoby, it was good to see him back out on the court. I think that he's a very nice player. He fits exactly what the Knicks are hoping to do, and he looked pretty good. He was moving around really well. It's not like he carries this massive load offensively, but he was able to score 14 points. He was 6 of 11 from the field, 2 of 5 from 3. And again, I just think that there's a level of the switchability with him on the defensive side of the floor that is so valuable for the Knicks. And I have a hard time with them because I felt like they were on their way to potentially being in the realm of contention when the trade deadline hit. But I do worry that we're maybe a little too... There's absolutely going to be a tough matchup for any team in the first round or the second round, but with the lack of experience that they've gotten to have as a unit as a whole, I think it's hard to imagine that they knock off maybe the top contenders in the Eastern Conference, even though what are those top contenders in the Eastern Conference? I still believe in the Boston Celtics, who had a big-time win last night. while missing a couple of their key players. Again, against the Jazz, who were also missing a couple of guys, so not going to over-celebrate that win either. But you also look at the Milwaukee Bucks, which I suppose we can transition into here, where the Bucks started out 6-0 after the All-Star break, were playing some tremendous defense, allowing an average of, I believe it was just over 98 points per game in those wins. But we acknowledged, at least on this show at the time, that the level of competition wasn't necessarily too high and that they were going to begin getting a little bit more tested. They had one of the hardest strengths of schedule in the second half of the season, and it was going to be a good opportunity for them to establish themselves more. But they have not been great. Now, a couple wins against the Clippers is nice for them, but they got ran out of the building against the Warriors last week. They lost to a LeBron James-less Lakers team over the weekend, and last night the Kings absolutely ran it up on them. In all of these losses, defense has been the issue, allowed over 120 points in each of these games, and I don't want to harp on it too much necessarily, because 120 points isn't necessarily uncommon in the NBA, but just like I was giving the attention to them being able to limit some of these teams as much as they were, the defense is what's under a microscope for Milwaukee as this season progresses, and it definitely was not there last night. The transition game continues to be a big struggle for them, and I just worry that when they don't have it on offense, it's going to be very difficult for them to compete in a 7-game series, especially when you have, granted, it was just one night, but performances like what Damian Lillard put up last night, going just 2 of 12 from the field, and he has just had, a handful of these games where he sort of disappears. I don't know if in a series against the Celtics or against the Knicks, who are going to be all over him, that it is cause for concern, I believe, with them. And I'm not saying I would rule them out by any means, but I was definitely building myself up in terms of talking myself into them as a contender, and there is a reason why I feel like they hover around maybe a third-tier contender, definitely under the Celtics and Nuggets, probably under the Clippers as well. And then each of those other teams on that tier necessarily have their big-time flaws, and the Bucks are a flawed team. But we also know that the ceiling can be there with them, so I'm definitely not ready to write them out. But other games in the NBA last night, the one that I was most fixated on was the Pacers versus Thunder game. The Pacers recently got the news this past week that Benedict Mathurin is going to be out for the rest of the season, which is a big-time blow. He's someone who has been in and out of the starting lineup for the past couple seasons, but it seemed like when they moved on from Buddy Hield, it was because they were hoping that Mathurin could take on a bigger role for them, and he was playing really well this season. I'm very high on him as a player, but this one stinks for them. And it's not that the Pacers were finals contenders this season, but they are in a position where they can find themselves overachieving, winning a playoff series potentially, and this one does hurt. That being said, they were able to hand it to the Thunder in this one. Just a really rough offensive game for the Thunder for a lot of the game. I mean, things did turn a little bit more into the game we were expecting around the third quarter, but the Thunder scored just 17 points in the first quarter. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander really struggled in this game. He was just 12 of 27 on the night. I was tracking it for a while. I didn't go back and actually look at the final stats with him, which I can probably do as we go here, but yeah, he had just one made shot outside of the paint in this one. really struggled, and you could see him. He hit a floater at one point in the third quarter, and he looked up to the sky as in, thank God, but things didn't really turn around from there. Now, the third quarter, like I mentioned, is where some of these teams started coming together. I actually thought that we saw flashes of Gordon Hayward actually playing some meaningful minutes for them, just doing the Gordon Hayward things that you would expect. It's not like he's this elite creator by any means, but he knows how to get to the rim. He had a really nice backdoor cut that got him a look at the rim as well. He turned in a pretty nice performance. They were trusting him playing down the stretch of this game. Now, Jalen Williams, J-Dub, was not playing in this game, so that contributed to it as well. But I did think that he just played into the system of the Oklahoma City Thunder pretty well. Do I expect him to play 30 minutes in a playoff game? No, definitely not. But he is one of the few older veteran guys on this roster, and had some nice flashes last night is all I'm saying. I did also want to talk about Chet Holmgren briefly, where it's not like he was incredible offensively, but I really do think that he doesn't. It's tough because with the Thunder, we've seen them in these games, especially against the Lakers as of recently when they were stopped in that game. It's really tough for the Thunder when he is basically their only big man getting minutes. I mean, Jalen Williams, the other one, J-Will, sorry about repeating this, but J-Will has provided some better minutes, but it doesn't seem like the Thunder trust him all that much, and it's a lot of Chet taking on the responsibilities of being the full-time paint protector, which he is very capable of doing. But as we get closer to the playoffs, I feel like I have this level of frustration that I wish the Thunder went out and got another big man as well, whether it was Daniel Gafford, who is somebody I repeatedly mentioned on the show prior to the deadline. I think if they really wanted to go out and swing on such as a Nick Claxton, I would have been really in for that, but they stick it out with Chet Holmgren, who he is not a bad option at all. I thought that he did a really good job in certain instances, especially in the fourth quarter. It was their offense that wasn't able to get it done for them, but the Pacers do score 72 points in the paint in this matchup, and I just feel like that's something that is really causing me hesitation in terms of considering the Thunder a big-time contender, is the fact that I don't think that they have the size to compete with some of the other teams in the Western Conference, specifically when you look at the Denver Nuggets. But this was a nice game for the Pacers. I've been very fixated on the Thunder in this. Miles Turner was good in this game. Again, like I said, they really carved out the Thunder on the inside, which was a big-time move for them. I thought that Halliburton sort of returned to his form somewhat in the fourth quarter as well. It just seemed like every time the Pacers, who were up big in the first half, the Thunder were trailing for the majority of the game, fought their way back into it late in the third quarter, but every time the Thunder really got in good position, the Pacers, they just couldn't get the stops, and I think that speaks more so to the really nice brand of offensive basketball that the Pacers play, so I do want to give them credit for that. Now, final note here, I just wanted to address the Minnesota Timberwolves Clippers game, where the Clippers were up by 22 points in the first half, and then we had a little bit of an injury scare with Kawhi Leonard. He played the entire first quarter, all 12 minutes. He then, after the break, went into the locker room early and left the arena before the game even wrapped up. This was a little bit scary. He had just missed the game prior against the Milwaukee Bucks. That was with a groin injury. This one was supposedly back spasms. So shouldn't be a real serious injury, you would have to imagine. But this is also just a little bit of the scare with the Clippers, is that anytime some of these guys could go down with some of the injury history they have. And when that happened, the Timberwolves took over. They didn't have anybody to guard Anthony Edwards, who exploded really from the second quarter on. He was just 3 of 8 in the first quarter, and Edwards finished 15 of 29. So he really elevated his game, scored 37 points. He was asked about it. He said he just saw a bunch of mismatches. And I think part of the reason why is the fact that Kawhi Leonard was not on the court for the Clippers, and this is a Clippers team that isn't elite defensively. So that is a little bit of a concern for me. It's just one game. It's the regular season. It's in this stretch where we're seeing a lot of injuries pop up. Maybe it was more so precautionary, but it is just a little bit of a reminder as we get closer to the playoffs that really hoping for a healthy Kawhi Leonard playoffs, because we've been deprived of it for years, and I do think he is one of at least my personal favorite playoff performers, but it's a matter of, is he actually going to be available? And we won't know that until we see it come May, June, and such. But that is all we have time for today. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Helps us out a lot, and we will be back tomorrow at 2 o'clock, so we will see you then.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.